I unlocked my phone at the airport and saw a notification that made my blood run cold. Motion detected inside my living room, even though I was 3 states away. That alert wasn't a glitch. And by the time I landed, I would discover that an HOA, Karen had hired a locksmith to break into my home for an inspection, setting off a chain of events she would desperately regret. I had left for vacation believing my house was safe, quiet, and boring. The doors were locked, cameras armed, and no one had permission to enter. The HOA had my email, my number, and my emergency contact. Yet not a single message warned me about any concern. Instead, while I was sipping coffee on a beach, someone decided my private property was theirs to access. The first clue came from my neighbor, who texted me a shaky video. In it, the HOA president stood on my porch, clipboard tucked under her arm, barking orders at a nervous locksmith. She claimed she had authority under inspection rights, a phrase she repeated louder every time someone questioned her. When the locksmith hesitated, she threatened fines, board action, and legal consequences until he drilled my lock. Once inside, she treated my home like a public building. She opened cabinets, photographed rooms, and muttered violations to herself like a ritual. Personal items were moved. Drawers were opened. My security camera went offline, conveniently right after she noticed it. She then replaced my lock, pocketed the only key, and taped a smug notice on my fridge stating the inspection was complete. I didn't see any of this until hours later, standing outside my own house with luggage in hand and no way inside. Neighbors watched in silence as I tried the door, confusion turning into anger. That was the moment it hit me that this wasn't about rules or safety. It was about control, ego, and someone who believed a title made her untouchable. What she didn't realize was that every step she took left evidence behind. Cameras recorded her arrival. Witnesses documented her threats. Laws were quietly waiting to be enforced. As I stood there under my porch light, I knew the story was far from over, and the next move would decide everything. I took a deep breath, called a locksmith of my own, and contacted an attorney before even stepping inside. I knew reacting emotionally would only help her narrative, so I chose documentation, patience, and strategy. Every photo, message, and witness statement was organized carefully, because I sensed this fight would not stay within the neighborhood for long. The consequences were about to spill into courtrooms, bank accounts, and reputations far beyond this street. The locksmith I hired looked uneasy the moment he examined my door, because it wasn't just locked, it was freshly replaced. When he asked who authorized the change, I told him the truth, and his expression shifted from professional calm to outright disbelief. Within minutes, I was back inside my home, but it no longer felt like mine. Something intangible had been taken along with my privacy. The first thing I noticed was the smell of unfamiliar cologne, lingering in the hallway. Then the details started stacking up. Shoes moved, papers slightly rearranged, my bedroom dresser drawers not fully closed. In the kitchen, my fridge magnet collection had been shifted to make space for the HOA notice. Like a flag planted in conquered territory, I photographed everything before touching a thing. I checked my cameras next. Outdoor footage showed exactly what my neighbors described. The HOA president arrived confidently, waving papers, acting like she owned the place. The audio picked up her voice clearly as she told the locksmith, "I'm authorized. If you don't do this, the association will hold you responsible." That sentence alone made my lawyer later pause the video and smile grimly. Inside footage was gone. The indoor camera had been unplugged and placed face down on the counter. That wasn't an accident. That was intent. She knew cameras meant accountability, and she removed the one thing that could capture her behavior inside my home. Ironically, that act alone turned a civil issue into something far more serious. Then came the inspection report emailed to me that evening. 12 alleged violations, petty ones, absurd ones. A rug color not approved, a bookshelf blocking airflow, my garage labeled unsafe because tools were visible. At the bottom was a total fine amount that nearly made me laugh, because it showed how detached from reality she was. She honestly believed this would intimidate me into silence. Instead, it fueled me. I called my attorney, forwarded the footage, photos, and report, and listened carefully as his tone changed from casual to sharp. He explained that HOAs have limited authority, and forced entry without notice or emergency is a line that cannot be uncrossed. Hiring a locksmith didn't make it legal. Replacing my lock didn't make it justified. By the next morning, cease and desist letters were drafted. Requests for board meeting minutes, inspection authorizations, and locksmith invoices were formally submitted. Neighbors volunteered statements. One even admitted she had been threatened with fines if she interfered. The HOA Karen had assumed fear would keep everyone quiet. She was wrong. As I organized my evidence, one thing became clear. She hadn't just broken into my home. She had exposed herself, and the more she tried to justify her actions, the deeper the hole became. This was no longer about an inspection. It was about accountability, and it was accelerating fast. 2 days later, the HOA president knocked on my door like nothing had happened, smiling tightly and holding a manila folder against her chest. I didn't open it. I spoke through the doorbell camera and asked her to leave. Instead, she launched into a rehearsed speech about community standards, claiming she acted in my best interest and had full authority under HOA bylaws. Every word sounded confident, but her eyes kept darting toward the camera. That same afternoon, the HOA sent a formal letter doubling down on her actions. They claimed the inspection was justified due to an anonymous complaint about unsafe conditions. No details. No emergency cited. Just vague language meant to sound official. My attorney read it once and said calmly, "They're panicking." We responded with facts. We cited state law requiring notice. We highlighted the lack of an emergency. We attached video footage, timestamps, and witness statements. We requested the name of the complainant, the board vote authorizing entry, and proof that the HOA had any right to enter a single-family home without consent. The silence that followed was deafening. Behind the scenes, neighbors started talking. Apparently, this wasn't her first overreach. Others shared stories of threats, intimidation, and selective enforcement. One family admitted she had tried to enter their home years earlier but backed off when they mentioned a lawyer. My case wasn't isolated. It was just the one with undeniable proof. Then came the locksmith. He contacted me directly, apologizing. He said she presented herself as a property manager and threatened him with liability if he refused. He provided a written statement, invoice, and even a copy of the work order she signed. Her name, her signature, her phone number. It was the smoking gun she handed over herself. The HOA's lawyer finally responded, attempting damage control. They offered to waive the fines and resolve the misunderstanding amicably. No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just an attempt to make it disappear. My attorney rejected it immediately. Breaking into a home isn't a misunderstanding. It's a violation. What made everything shift was the police report. Once filed, officers reviewed the footage and statements. They confirmed that HOA authority does not override criminal law. Forced entry without consent or emergency carries consequences, regardless of titles or intentions. Suddenly, the HOA president stopped answering emails altogether. At a hastily scheduled board meeting, she tried to justify herself again, but board members were visibly uncomfortable. When residents asked direct questions, she deflected. When evidence was mentioned, she grew defensive. The illusion of control was cracking in real time. I watched it all unfold, knowing one thing for certain. The power she relied on only worked when people were afraid. Now that fear was gone, and what replaced it was far more dangerous for her. The next step would make this public in ways she never anticipated. The situation exploded the moment I shared my experience publicly. Not out of revenge, but as a warning. I posted the footage, documents and timeline online, carefully removing personal details while keeping the facts intact. Within hours, the story spread far beyond our neighborhood, reaching people who had endured similar HOA abuse and finally saw proof they were not alone. Comments poured in from across the country. Former board members, attorneys, and everyday homeowners confirmed the same thing. Inspections do not grant forced entry, and authority does not erase consent. Reporters began reaching out, asking for verification, footage, and statements. The HOA president's name started appearing in searches, alongside words she never expected. And that was when the panic truly set in. The HOA board called an emergency meeting without her present. Neighbors later told me the mood was tense and unusually quiet. Legal counsel warned them that liability was no longer theoretical. Insurance would not cover intentional acts. The locksmith's statement alone created serious exposure, and the police report elevated everything. Suddenly, distancing themselves from her became a survival instinct. 2 days later, I received an email from the HOA attorney requesting a private settlement discussion. The tone was dramatically different. Gone were the firm declarations of authority. Instead, there was concern, caution, and urgency. They offered to pay for damages, legal fees, and even compensation for emotional distress, provided I signed a confidentiality agreement. I declined immediately. Silence would only protect the system that allowed this to happen. I didn't want money in exchange for secrecy. I wanted change, accountability, and a clear message that homeowners are not subjects. That refusal triggered the next domino. The HOA president resigned for personal reasons the following morning. Her resignation letter avoided specifics, but the timing said everything. The board issued a community notice acknowledging improper actions, promising policy reviews, and suspending all inspections indefinitely. For the first time, Residents felt power shift away from fear and toward transparency. Then came the call I didn't expect. The district attorney's office wanted to ask questions. Not promises, not assumptions, but facts. I answered calmly, providing everything I had. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just told the truth. What started as an unlawful inspection had become a public reckoning. And while the story was far from over, one thing was already clear. She didn't just break into my house. She broke the illusion that no one could stop her. Months later, the house finally felt like mine again. But the impact of what happened stretched far beyond my walls. The investigation concluded quietly but firmly. No dramatic courtroom scene, no viral arrest footage, just official letters, documented findings, and consequences that mattered. The former HOA president was charged, not as a villain in a movie, but as a person who abused authority and crossed legal boundaries. She assumed no one would challenge. The HOA itself underwent a forced restructuring. New bylaws were drafted with explicit limits on inspections, mandatory notice requirements, and strict penalties for board overreach. An independent property management company replaced the old guard. Homeowners were invited into meetings instead of silenced. Fear dissolved into cautious confidence, and the neighborhood began to heal. As for me, I received restitution for the lock, legal fees and damages, but that was never the real victory. The real win was knowing that standing firm had protected others. Neighbors told me they slept better, spoke up more, and stopped feeling like tenants in homes they owned. That shift was priceless. The former HOA Karen never apologized publicly. She faded from community relevance, her name now a cautionary tale, whispered whenever someone mentioned power without accountability. Her attempt to control everything ended with her losing the very authority she clung to. I still travel, still lock my door, still check my cameras. But now I do it knowing my rights, not just my responsibilities. I learned that silence enables abuse, and documentation defeats it. Titles don't trump laws, clipboards don't grant keys, and intimidation only works when people believe they're alone. This story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity. If someone ever tells you they're entering your home because they can, remember this: they can't, unless you let them. And if they try anyway, the truth has a way of opening doors they can't close. If you want more real stories like this, where ordinary people stand up to systems that overstep, you know what to do. Because the only thing stronger than authority is accountability shared in the open.